On AM 560, The Answer.
Experience the many restaurants of Seven Bridges on the evening of August 8th at the Golf Club in Woodridge, Illinois. Aside from great tastings and treats, Sample Seven Bridges will have prize drawings and DJ entertainment throughout the evening. Visit chambers630.com to register.
Let freedom ring this afternoon at 2 with Sean Hannity, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Except in for Amy today is Kristen McQuarrie, Chicago Tribune editorial board. Mike Pence spoke of the shootings in a metaphysical sense, in part, as well as offering the policy direction coming from the Trump administration on the topic of public safety. Pence at an Alliance for Defending Freedom event in Virginia had this to say.
Hate has no place in America. And the sinister ideologies of racism, bigotry, and white supremacy must be defeated.
What about the sinister ideology of cultural Marxism? Hate has a place there. And then Nicole Wallace at MSNBC proved it yesterday.
What do you do when certainly the last Republican president fought for, sought, and it's not ideal, but had 44% of the Latino vote? It was so politically powerful inside the last Republican administration. President Obama used the power of the presidency to try to pass comprehensive immigration reform with the Latino community, Latino leaders at the table. You now have a president, as you said, talking about exterminating Latinos.
Yeesh.
Exterminating Latinos.
Well, she's kind of sort of apologized.
She did, and Scott Adams, the Dilbert cartoon creator, accepted her apology and offered his own to anybody he's accidentally accused of ethnic genocide. Because it was all accidental. Just as, well, no, I mean, actually, to her credit, AOC and the Socialist Spice Girls and others who refer to Border Patrol agents effectively as Nazi stormtroopers and detention centers at the border as concentration camps, and all of the other things that have been said, that's not painful rhetoric. Painful rhetoric. That's another word used ubiquitously. Everything is painful. You've cut me to my core. A politician says something with which I disagree, or how, I disagree with how it was said, and I'm reduced to a puddle of tears.
Well, she may have just slipped up, but AOC referring to holding places at the border as another Holocaust I can't let that one go. It's just so absurd, and it's absurd that people actually buy into that, believe it. And nobody really talks about how Representative Omar, twice, I think, the House has passed resolutions condemning her use of hateful language.
Well, not her use. We condemn anti-Semitism generally. We're not going to target anybody specifically. No, of course not.
Her. Right, of course.
Well, that's a perfect segue to our next guest, who is Andrew Klavan, a famed Hollywood screenwriter and also a podcaster. Another Kingdom is in season 2. That's Andrew Klavan's podcast. Also, it's worth mentioning, if you haven't seen it yet, you should. Gosnell, The Trial of America's Biggest Serial Killer, and Andrew Klavan was the screenwriter on that film as well. Andrew, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always great to be here. Thanks.
Jim Garrity over at National Review had a write-up today about, yes, maybe it was yesterday, but the idea is there's a certain feeling that maybe our country is on the precipice of something quite terrible, individual incidents leading to a more terrible place than just sort of confronting what occurred in Dayton, what occurred in El Paso, what has occurred before in the not too distant past. He makes the point, this isn't the first time America's seen a slew of horrible news in a short period of time. In a 14-month span in 15 and 16, America witnessed riots in Baltimore, Charleston church massacre, Chattanooga recruiting center attack, Paris attacks, and San Bernardino terrorist attack. That was within 14 months over those 2 calendar years. But he suggests that, and so does Lance Morrow, writing over at City Journal, suggests that darker days, or some sort of vagueness leading to potential darker days, are ahead for America. What's your reaction to that suggestion?
I certainly think it's a danger. I'm not going to say that it's necessarily coming, but I certainly think it's a danger. There's always been two sides in this country, but we're at a place where the two sides are not communicating with each other. We're not talking to each other. You just went through a number of, a lot of left-wing hateful rhetoric. And my problem with left-wing hateful rhetoric is a little different than my problem with right-wing hateful rhetoric, in that right-wing hateful rhetoric tends to be on the extreme. It's on the dark web. It's on comment sections, on blogs. Whereas left-wing hateful rhetoric is on NBC News. It's on CNN. It's on the debate stage at the presidential rally. I mean, the people who are calling Trump Hitler are running for president. That's just not true on our side. I mean, I have heard any number of people on the right, including President Trump, condemn this, sick, twisted idea that our nation should be a white nation. That's a disgusting idea. It's not true. It has never been true. And of course it should be condemned. But who's saying it? Who's standing up in Congress and talking like that? Where we have people like AOC, condemning our patrol officers, our law enforcement officers, who are enforcing the laws that her body, Congress, is supposed to be passing. If they don't like those laws, they should change them. They have that power. Why not use it instead of yelling at the poor badges who are out there doing their jobs? So it really is a difference. The hate speech is coming on the comedy shows at night. The left-wing hate speech is coming on CNN. I mean, they've got crazy people on MSNBC saying that Donald Trump is lowering the flag to half-mast, and he's raising it up on August 8th because 8/8 stands for Heil Hitler, because H is the eighth. I mean, that's a guy.
Oh, my gosh.
On MSNBC,
I hadn't heard that one.
Their security analyst. Yes, he actually says this. And I think when you have this incredible rhetoric coming out from the left, of course, ordinary people, ordinary left-wing people with whom if we were sitting across the table from them, with whom we could debate, with whom we could compromise, those people become hysterical. They start to think, that we on the right are sitting around plotting the fascist overthrow of the country. I don't blame them. If I read the New York Times and thought that was the news, if I thought the New York Times was actual news instead of a sophomoric left-wing rag, I would be in a complete state of hysteria about what Republicans are planning and what Donald Trump really thinks. Dan Rather is on TV telling Don Lemon that we shouldn't report on what the president says. We should report on what he means, what he feels. So when the president gets up and says, "I condemn hatred," and the New York Times runs a headline saying that he condemns hatred, AOC and all the other candidates beat up the New York Times until they actually change the headline to be less favorable and less factual to Donald Trump. So we've got a situation in which the left owns, at a guess, I would say 85 to 90% of the communications apparatus in the country. They own Google, they own Twitter, they own Facebook, they own the networks, they own the New York Times, they own the Washington Post, and they are so worked up and so hysterical and so deeply enmeshed in their woke philosophy, in which even a pronoun can destroy the life of somebody, that we all seem to them to be extremists because we support the Constitution and the traditions of this country, and because we think this is a great country and not an evil country. And so that seems extreme to them. And it's just a lot of noise they're making, and it's got to have an effect. And I think part of that effect is to divide us. It's to make the right angry because they're excluded from the communications landscape. And it's to make the left hysterical because they don't know us and they don't even hear what we're saying.
In addition to all of that, they go unchecked. So in one of your most recent columns, you talk about Chuck Todd and how he does not, the media doesn't he doesn't ask follow-up questions. And it just, if the left is hearing something they don't like, they just change the narrative and that becomes fact. And I've been thinking about it not just with Mueller, but with the shooter in El Paso, where in his manifesto he says, this is not Trump related, I have felt this way for a long time. He talks about a book he read 10 years ago that was very influential. We also know now more about his childhood that probably had more to play into his mental state. But no one's listening to that. Even though it's in writing in his manifesto, you still have most members of the media still openly, and these Democratic candidates for governor, openly blaming Donald Trump for the deaths of the citizens in the Walmart.
Kristen, this is absolutely right. The problem with Chuck Todd, I don't think Chuck Todd is an evil guy. I don't think he sits in his laboratory cooking up, toxins to destroy the country. I think he goes to work every day and he's surrounded by people who agree with him. His bosses agree with him. His corporate bosses agree with him. Everybody he knows agrees with him. There is nobody in the newsroom to say, Chuck, that's not true, and here's some facts that you should look at. None of the newsrooms. I would bet money, I really would, that if you went into all of the major newsrooms in this country, you would not find a single person with the power to affect editorial decisions who voted for Donald Trump. How is that possible? How is it possible that half the electorate wants Donald Trump in office and nobody, I would bet, in a position to make editorial decisions in our newsrooms voted for him? So if you are surrounded by that, psychologists have shown this again and again, when you're surrounded by people, only by people who agree with you, you become more extreme. There's nobody to check your ideas. You go further and further in the direction you're going. The right doesn't have this problem because we're surrounded by Hollywood. We're surrounded by the news telling us the other side all the time. So we're constantly kind of have to check ourselves and think about where we are and what we're talking about. They never have that experience, except with Donald Trump, who has confronted them with their dishonesty. And so they've just turned him into the boogeyman, And because Chuck Todd never has to deal with anybody disagreeing with him in a serious way, in a position of authority, he actually went on the air and said that there is a gigantic right-wing propaganda machine that the Democrats have not learned how to fight. What could that possibly be? What venue is that? It's Fox News. It's one cable station where they dare, two of the people on it dare to put forward a right-wing point of view, and there's no question about it. Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, they are right-wingers, and they say so, and they are not dishonest about it. That's the one cable station that has any kind of diversity of opinion on it, and that to Chuck Todd is this mighty machine that he doesn't know how to fight when he's wielding NBC, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. He's got all that on his side. Why isn't he winning? It must be because there's some kind of sinister machine up against him. And when he says that on the air, there's nobody in authority around him to say, Chuck, you're out of your mind. Come on, let's be honest about this. And I think it's a problem. I think the corporations in this country are left-wing now. We've had a transition from a manufacturing economy to an information economy, and that has caused them to become more to the left. And so they have an interest in stocking their newsrooms with left-wingers. It's not really the people in the newsroom's fault. They're in this situation where they're just in this kind of iron bubble. But the corporations are basically serving the interests of these corporations who love regulation, who love big government, where you can bribe your way into the position you want to be in, they love big government for all kinds of reasons. And so Chuck Todd is just a servant of those people without even knowing it.
Well, and the Fox News, it's interesting, or that hate machine, as Elizabeth Warren calls it. It was almost like she was referring to Fox News as an enemy of the people. Perish the thought. But it's interesting. Institutional memory is important, I find, and I find it generally lacking in the D.C. press corps. And so Pauline Kael's famous formulation, the New Yorker film critic in 1972, I know, how did Richard Nixon win? I don't know anybody who voted for him. He won 49 states. They wouldn't even, it seems to me this is generational. Or it's been multi-generational. This has been going on for generations and generations in media and culture and information, and it's just being scaled exponentially because of the digital age. But if it weren't for Fox News, not only would they never be surrounded or come across anybody that was conservative, they wouldn't even understand that there are people who think conservatively on issues where they are left that exist in the media, because before Fox News, they really didn't, per Pauline Kael.
That's right. And you go on universities. I talk on universities a lot. And the administration, not the students, the administration put out things several times about me and how hateful I am and how awful I am. And then I go and I look the students in the face and I just say, look, hear me out. Hear out what I'm going to say, because sometimes they protest and sometimes they try to block the doors. And when I start talking, they think like, I actually agree with some of that. And then we have questions and answers. What do they think is going to happen? Do they think I'm going to open my mouth and words are going to come out and they're going to burst into flames? They've made them so upset about speech being violence that they really do think they're committing an act of heroism when they shut down free speech. And listen, they're saying this openly. I mean, the New York Times is basically mobilizing against free speech. They talk about weaponizing free speech, whatever that means. So they've really lost the plot of the country. They really have. And when you talk about dark forces being let out, I'm concerned about this. I mean, I've said this a million times. I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal. I'm a conservative because I want each person to live his life and pursue his happiness and, be free to speak his mind. That is my brief. What I'm trying to conserve is the ideals in the Declaration and the Constitution. When I'm a conservative, that's what I'm trying to conserve. And that's what I'm afraid is going away. There are voices on the right now talking about how liberalism has failed. Liberalism in the old sense of that word, not in the new one, but in the sense of freedom. And there are people on the right saying liberalism has failed, and the left has given up on liberalism entirely. And that, to me, is a dangerous situation because it does remind me of the 1930s when, there were communists and fascists, and you sort of had to choose between those two. And what I'm saying is no, let's choose to be free people. Let's choose to be individuals. Let's choose to protect our individuality by limiting the force of government. And those are ideas that I think are like off the table, and they're largely off the table because the left has taken control of the communications apparatus in this country, in the newsrooms, in Hollywood, and in the academy.
He is Andrew Klavan.